budget workshops ago, we discussed some road paving projects throughout the city and some potential funding mechanisms for those paving projects. One that the commission expressed interest in was general obligation or GO bonds. That's the process where the commission would put a ballot referendum out to the residents to see if they would support the issuance of debt for a project. So tonight we have Jeremy Neidfeld, who is the managing director of PFM, who's our financial advisor, as well as Alex Fisher, who is an attorney with our bond counsel, Neighbors Giblin and Nickerson, here tonight to present to you. They're going to go through a high-level overview of what that process looks like, the things that the city would need to accomplish. We're not going to discuss specific projects tonight, but more so the process that we would need to go through to make that happen. So with that, I will invite Jeremy and Alex up to give their presentation.
Good evening. It's good to see you all again. Jeremy Neidfeld, as introduced by Dallas. I'm with PFM. I'm going to go through the first part of the presentation, talk a little bit about the financing that was recently completed, and then talk through the GO process. I'll let Alex introduce himself here in a second, but he'll talk about the legal components of the process and kind of the specifics that go into that referendum. And then we can wrap it up with kind of the action steps, and I've got a market update if there's interest in seeing that. So, Alex.
Good afternoon, Alex Fisher with Neighbors Giblin and Nickerson. Thanks for having me up here today. So as Jeremy mentioned, just today I'll be going over a brief high-level overview of the legal components required to do a general obligation bond. There's a little bit more involved in doing that versus your typical revenue bond because you do need the constituency to approve it via referendum due to the taxing power that's pledged for that. So I'll let Jeremy get back into it, and then I'll pop back up once we get to the legal stuff.
Thanks, Alex. So again, this is the table of contents for the presentation. The City Hall financing that was recently completed, an overview of the general obligation bond process, and then a market overview. So recently, just a few months ago, we were here getting approval to move forward with the funding of the City Hall by the issuance of public debt. So that was a successful process. We were able to get into the market. It was a volatile market this past several months, as you all probably know. We priced the deal at just under 4.5%. It's a 30-year financing with an 8-year optional call, which gives us some flexibility to potentially do a refinancing in the future. The city received very good ratings, Moody's ratings of a AA3, so a AA rated credit. And the purpose was to, of course, consolidate the city employees under one roof. These are some details of the project. Total cost is about $7.5 million. The guaranteed max price with some cushion is $8.6 million, and about 3 of that came from other sources outside of the bond funding. Here's the location right behind us. And this is what it's going to look like. So now why we're here. General obligation bonds. General obligation bonds look and feel a lot like what you just issued for the City Hall. The differentiation between the general obligation bonds and a revenue bond is how you support that debt issuance. First of all, why do we do bond transactions? Yeah, that's a very simple discussion that takes place on a daily basis. Obviously you want to be able to fund something that will last a long time, and if you wait to fund it with PAYGO, you might not ever get there. So that's the purpose, as you know, for bond financing. As I said, the financing process looks very similar, but for the fact that you have to get referendum approval and go through some additional legal steps to put it in place. You would still select the team, you'd still size and structure the deal just like we did the recent financing. Y'all would have to approve the financing, we would get ratings, we'd come back, issue the debt, and then you'd have the closing and then the ongoing burden of having to do ratings updates and continuing disclosures. This is kind of a detailed overview of all those things. We would work through the process exactly the same way. Once we get referendum approval, There will be some steps that happen that Alex will go over that happen before we get into the financing process, but the transaction management is identical. Again, the main participants are your financial advisor. We would be involved. You would also have issuers counsel, which would be the city attorney. You'd have bond counsel. That'll be Alex's firm. There would be an underwriter or a bank, depending on how you choose to access the market. And then you would have the rating agency, the paying agent, and all the other folks involved. And this is where we get legal.
All right, Alex Fisher, jump back in from Neighbors Giblin. So just a high-level overview of the legal requirements. So again, the general obligation bond, the pledge is the full faith and security of the city of Newberry in this case. And so with that requires the voter approval. There's a couple of specific requirements for the referendum, but typically it's going to follow the normal election laws in Chapter 100 and 101. So we'll work with the city attorney and staff to make sure that, we cross all those boxes off there.
Do you know what some of those special things are? Like, do you have to have a certain percentage of the voter
Yeah, so
turnout? Do you have to?
So not turnout, but again, it's just, it'll be, on the election, you do, and I'll get into a little bit more of this on the next slide, but one of those is the special notices that's in addition to your typical notice on a referendum. So this is when we would work with Dallas and staff to have that published. It's got to be published at least 30 days before, and then it's got to be published twice. So 5 weeks before the election, and then again 3 weeks before the election in a newspaper of general circulation. So that's a specific one for the bond referendum that fortunately we've been brought in on the front end of this process. So when we run into issues, it's typically when issuers bring us in late and then they haven't necessarily noticed the election properly. And so we'll have to go through the validation process if that's the case, which in general obligation bonds, it just depends on when we're brought in on the process and if it's a scenario where we think that it'll be contested and we want to go ahead and validate the bonds in that case. So going on to the next slide here, just a few things.
Button right there in front of you, if should work.
There we go. All righty. So going on to the next slide here, just a few things on the referendum. So the ballot, it's going to require the amount of bonds that the city anticipates to issue, as well as the purpose of the bonds. And again, we'll work with the city attorney and staff to kind of massage that language. There is a 75-word limit, and that can't be exceeded. So that's, again, within the Florida statutes. And so the general election laws will kind of push us where we need to be in that. And the final thing is going to be the rate of interest on the bonds. And again, this is kind of a fluid situation. So typically, we see, the maximum interest permitted by law, but if the city wanted to, they could put, a specific limit on that, and we would have a little bit of a separate discussion if they wanted to do a limited general obligation bond that limits the millage that would be allowed for the security on this. But again, that's a little bit more of a structural conversation.
Commissioner Martin.
Alex, that sounds like if the ballot language says 5 million at 3.5 and we can't get 3.5, then despite the vote passing, it wouldn't move forward because we couldn't get the 3.5.
That's correct. Yeah,
correct?
You would be confined to the parameters within that. And so typically you kind of allow for a broader maximum interest rate there. And if you wanted to limit the millage, then you would go down more of your limited general obligation bond route there, which could, you would limit your referendum and how much you would want to raise taxes on that. But again, that's a little bit of a different conversation than just your standard general obligation bond there.
And Alex, this may be for you or maybe for Jeremy. I'm
Yeah.
not quite sure who's the money guy, but so we have to have an amount that we're going to bond.
Yep.
But, you know, we have a wastewater project that 4 years ago was 20 million and now is, I don't even want to tell you how much it is now. So how do you write an amount on a ballot language? So we got $20 million of roads we want to do when we take the vote, but by the time we get through design and engineer,
So
is
I
$30 million.
would suggest with staff and your financial advisor to kind of make those projections forward-looking and then understand that, you know, these bonds are going to be issued down the road. And
so you
so
bond more than what you think you're going to need, and then you.
whatever you
back-
think you need is what I would encourage, but that would be more of Jeremy and working with staff on the amount that you would not want to exceed for that. That's typically how we would set up the referendum language, is a not to exceed amount.
Mr. Mayor, that was going to be my point. The referendum would be up to, so we would say it's an up to $20 million within there. If we think there's $20 million in projects, we probably said up to $25 million to give us that cushion, but it only actually ever bonds what we really need for the project.
Okay.
Yep, you're not necessarily, so you can approve, you know, for instance, $100 million for road improvements and then not necessarily borrow all that. Let's say you do it, you know, in $20 million and that's the end of the project, that would be fine.
I just don't want to get into, because I think for something like this, you have to have a project around town. Every quadrant has to get something, right? And if you don't have enough money, then how do you pick which projects moves forward? So, well, I voted in favor of it, and I didn't get my road fixed, and it did make the cut. So you'd have to have enough money. Once you make I mean, in my mind, the ballot is a promise, right? You vote yes, we're promising we're going to make those projects happen under this. So go ahead. I don't want to get off on that. I'm
No,
just, when I
absolutely.
see the first thing is the amount of the bond, that's kind of my number one question. Commissioner Martin?
Along that lines, is there language of what specifically the project is going towards at the onset?
Yeah, so in the referendum, you would want to build in some language about what the purpose of the bonds is going to be towards, and that would be confined to a capital project.
The ballot's not going to say Southwest 46. It'll
Right.
say road projects.
Right.
Generally, yeah.
Typically, what cities do is up until, you know, the election, we would be doing an informational campaign to say, it's $25 million, here are all the roads that we would pave with this $25 million. And the commission could adopt that as, this is the list that we will fund with this bond, these bond dollars. Similar to what we did in the first round of wild spaces, where we
So
had a
the-
list of what
Okay,
we. And
so
in one-
that list has to be approved to begin with, because I don't want to end up looking like the school board where we promise one thing and then we nutshell it around and all of a sudden we're not doing any of these roads, we're doing something else.
Yeah, I
All
mean, I
that's
kind of see it as like
All
a,
that's stated up
So
front.
you can, this would be, you know, up to
So it's up to us whether we do it that
staff
way or
and,
not.
and, you know, when
What
we
put-
draft the
what you
language
guys
in the
put on
ballot,
list.
what is going to be funded under that specifically, or, you know, if you wanted to do more of a broader touch and say, you know, use for capital road projects, you know, you could specify it
And not list all the
broadly
roads.
there.
You can
So it really
adopt a
depends how we
ordinance that
write
says,
it.
This is what we're going to do with the
Okay.
money.
So, okay,
And again, there is flexibility to do tranches. Let's say that you don't want to borrow, you know, overall you approve $100 million. You can do 20 million in year one, another 20 in year two, and another, you know, down the road. And if you don't need it all, then you can leave that and walk away. You're not necessarily during the referendum approval requiring yourself to borrow that amount, but you are giving the city the ability to if it would like to.
Dallas.
And the ballot language can also be for multiple categories. So it's not uncommon to see referendums that say we're going to spend this much on roads, and then this much on recreation, or this much on some other houses. Sure. Well, no, sure, I'd leave that. But you could roll multiple things into the referendum to either complete multiple capital projects or gain more paper.
All right.
didn't mean to sidetrack.
No, that was really it for the kind of legal overview, really driven by questions mostly for this kind of stuff. So if you guys have anything else that pops up for me, just let me know. But that's really all I had for today.
Thank Thanks, Alex. Yeah, there's some good questions there, and I'm glad we brought up wild spaces. You know, the county, they had a limited GO process, so they capped, I believe it was a third of a mil, for 30 million and over a certain period of time. So those are the kind of bounds that you put on, you know, the referendum, and that comes back for approval by resolution typically. So y'all would see the language, and then part of that, you know, you could talk about the project list. You know, the difference between a general obligation approval versus a sales tax approval is that the general obligation approval is, you know, based on property taxes and is bound by however you set it, whether it's a limited GO, you know, for the amount of the millage, a third mil, half a mil, 1 mil, or with the total cost. And if you do a limited GO, it's the combination of the two. We've talked a lot, you know, about a bank loan versus a bond deal. This year, bond deals are trading favorably when compared to bank loans. You know, it's very possible that next summer, if this referendum gets approved, that bank loans, for whatever the term is that we're looking at issuing over, makes sense. So we stuck to bond sales here just because that's what we've been talking through. But historically, the city has done bank loans, and they're essentially the same thing, just a little easier to implement a bank loan. Not quite the process that goes into that. We recently issued a competitive sale, so it was a good credit. It was good terms to get done in the competitive market. Negotiated sale is basically where you hire the underwriter at the outset, and then you price it negotiated. So we get on the table, they tell us what the rates are going to be. You know, we argue that it should be, you know, different, and it's just a different process. Typically for smaller deals or good credits, you know, competitive sale is a good way to go. So the bond rating here, typically a revenue bond, so not ad valorem revenue. If you're a AA3, you know, it would be notched off your GO. So we'd be looking at another AA type credit, AA3 or AA2. As mentioned, y'all work through the process and you're rated a AA3. So we would anticipate a AA2 or a AA3 going through the process with a GO. At worst, a AA3 would be, you know, the parity level. Some of your credit strengths are mentioned here. I'm not sure how much of this was disclosed during the transaction, but, you know, obviously the local economy is growing. You have good reserves and liquidity and low leverage. So those are credit strengths. The weaknesses are high taxpayer concentration. So, you know, as far as being more of a bedroom community and having commuters, you know, the more you bring business to Newberry, the better, and that challenge goes away. And then obviously deal with capital planning and growth, which is why we're talking. These are a list of expenses just to show there is several folks that are involved in the process, and they all get paid, just like on the last deal. I think it was about 15 basis points of costs, so it was 4.5%. About 4.35 of that was pure market interest rates, and another 0.15% was to pay all the folks in the deal. And these are the things Dallas will work with, along with disclosure, your continuing disclosure. You're promising to tell the market on an annual basis, you know, how the city's finances are. You're going to test, you know, how much you earn to make sure you're not earning too much, and then you're going to maintain the rating on an annual basis. That's it for the process. Any questions on type of sale or participants?
Come on, man, you can do better than 15 basis points.
Well, I like the idea of 100 million. You know, you do 100 million and that percentage comes down significantly.
Well, we ain't gonna do 100 million.
No. That's why I was glad Alex suggested, not me.
I mean, I'm not, come on, can't you make it where we get, you know, somewhere around 1%, you know?
1% on fees? Yes, so this was actually, you know, a little less than an eighth of a percent.
No, wait a minute, you said what, 15 basis points?
15 basis points.
1.5?
Yeah, so in total yield, just under 4.5%. And of that, call it 10 to 15 basis points was the fee component.
Come on, man. You can do better than that. You can, bro.
I have faith. Market update. You got it.
I'll let you off right now. But you can do better than that.
Come back, we're getting to 0.7.
Okay, yeah, we'll come back and see what we can do with that.
I already asked Al, he didn't have a checkbook on him tonight, but next time he comes, he's bringing it.
So the B-Val AAA curve, this is the curve we priced off of. One of the recommendations to go with the 30-year structure was how flat that yield curve is, so you're not paying much of a higher rate by going out long. It's the same reason a lot of folks do a 30-year mortgage instead of a 15. Gives you budget flexibility as well as some cost control throughout the term of the loan. AAA yields, you can see, have come down. So when we issued, they were maybe a little bit higher than they are currently, but generally it's been flat since the end of May when there was a lot of volatility there. As you can see in the top right, a year ago, rates were about 70 basis points higher on the front end and 30 basis points higher on the long end. There's a picture that shows the Treasury curve. So when the city issues debt using a bank loan process, the banks price their off the Treasury index. That's just how their cost of funds is calculated. So that's the scale we use, which is why it's important here. You see the market change is a little more dramatic with the Treasury movement. Treasury markets have rallied, but then again, that's a taxable rate. So the tax exempt is discounted from that. These are the two side by side. You can see where the range is on rates. That's the solid bar from top to bottom. Rates currently are the dark blue, so you can see they're a little lower than the light blue. Rates are a little lower now than they were a year ago for both indices. And this is why folks are talking about, the flexibility to issue variable rate and other things like that, lines of credit, commercial paper. The Fed funds target, as that rate comes down, we're hearing there's going to be a couple of cuts to look forward to here, and that's what the market has already budgeted into the September cut. So we're anticipating a double cut in September, and then additional cuts to get us down to closer to that 3% short-term rate. So as short-term rates come down, you'll see the curve actually increase to a more normal yield curve, meaning you're going to pay a higher rate as you go out longer. Right now, you almost pay essentially the same. So as it comes down to a normal yield curve, short-term rates are lower, and that's when you pick up that benefit. That's all we got.
All right, Commissioner, got any questions?
Yeah, a couple.
Commissioner Farnsworth?
Just for my clarification, because I'm not 100% sure, but to pay back the bond or loan, is that done through ad valorem tax, or is not issued like a
Yeah.
assessment fee or anything like that?
So the GO, the general obligation bond, would be on your trim. That'd be paid with your property taxes.
But it shows as separate from our millage rate.
Correct.
So whatever the commission says is the millage rate, that's there. And then if this referendum passes, it would have a millage associated with it, 2, 3, whatever Jamie ends up saying, well, we need 40 million, 50 million to do whatever, 10 million. So it will register as separate, but it will be property taxes.
Okay.
And that millage rate adjusts every year to fund the debt service. So as the city grows and our taxable value grows, you can expect that millage rate would decrease because the lower millage rate will generate the same funding for that debt service.
That was going to be my second question, Doug. You're ahead of the game, buddy.
And one slight difference between the limited GO and the full GO is, as Dallas mentioned, a full GO with property valuations going up would see a reduction in the millage to match that annual payment. With a limited GO, that's where you get some capacity controls on the front end, because you might not necessarily be at the point where, say, $500,000 generates the full amount that you need to do all the projects. So it could be $500,000 up to say 40 million, but a half a mil today only gets you 25. So you would essentially wait until there's an increase in valuation to where that half a mil gets you the next 15.
Commissioner Martin?
Correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't the property appraiser's office charge us a fee for collection? And has that been accounted for in this issuance?
Mr. Mayor, the property, it's the tax collector's office who charges us a fee, but they do not charge a fee on property taxes. They are required by the Constitution to collect our property taxes. It's assessments that they charge a slight fee on. So our fire assessment, they charge, I think it's 1% fee for collection, but no, they would not collect a fee on this.
Other questions? Okay, so this is actually more for our team. So what are the next steps for this dais to consider? I know we're waiting on the road update, so we know kind of what we're looking at, and we're gonna wave that magic wand with inflation and say, well, it's 40 million a day, and so we're expecting 200 million 4 years from now, right? So we get
Mr. Mayor?
that. That's the first next step.
We're prepared to do, Jamie was going to do the roads presentation on Monday, but he had a family emergency he needed to attend to. So we're hoping to do that roads presentation at our next commission meeting, which will have, here's all the roads, here's their condition, here's our estimated cost. I believe it's, if you want to do all the roads, it's 40 million, was.
I don't have it off the top of my head, but we are, providing.
It was 20 million however many years ago that we, roughly in that range.
In that presentation, it'll give you the inventory, it'll give you the cost to pave each road, and at certain roads, it'll give you the projection if you wanted chip seal and a little pavement.
So we'll be giving the commission that presentation, and then at that point, if the commission's still interested in pursuing this, we would recommend having a separate workshop to determine what projects you wanted to roll into it. If the commission gives us direction at that workshop to continue, then we would engage Jeremy and Alex and our city attorney's team to start working on the referendum.
Okay.
Our target would be the April 2025 election.
I mean, I think that those are all things that you guys have to, I want to make sure we're building in time so that we can create informational graphics, those kinds of things, so that people know what they're voting on. I think we have to consider whether we want to try it for the April election or whether this is a standalone and we don't try to tie it up in silly season. It's just, here it is, So I think there's a lot that we have to talk about up here. So I would say first step, let's find out what the number is and what it's projected to be. And then we can decide after that, how much, because I think it's either let's try to do them all at one time and then we can go out to bid for one company and say, look, what would you do if you bid all of these and you got steady work for the next 10 years because we're going to pave out all of these roads. I think what projects get on that list deserves a lot of consideration. The alternative is what we're doing now, which is kind of piecemeal one at a time as it goes. But I never have seen anybody vote themselves more taxes. So I think, what's that? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've seen bodies vote, but when you put it right on, I guess Wild Space is at the 1 mil, right? But when it comes to this, it's going to be, it depends on the millage. If we can get some roads done and we're talking about 1 mil, then but if we're getting roads done, but it's going to take 3 more mills, so I think, I don't want us,
Reason I'm wanting to put it there
Right.
in front of the people.
so they can see
Let
it.
them make that.
Right.
Would it be part of the referendum issuance if we were to say, unless the vote has at least a 40% participation or 50% participation, is that something that would be on us to put in the actual referendum?
I mean, that was one of my questions back
at
at legal.
There wasn't necessarily specific, but could we build that into the referendum?
I would have to.
Yeah, come to the podium for me. Because I could see,
So I
no
would have
matter
to
what,
look into that a little bit more specific and get with the city attorney on that. That's a little bit more into the election law and outside of my practice of the financing side of it. To to be determined. I would have to come back with more of an answer after doing some research on that.
Alex, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, if the referendum passes, there's nothing that requires the commission to still move forward.
No, not at
So,
all.
The commission, if,
Because you still have the approval process of the authorizing resolutions that go down for the specific projects down the road. So the referendum is really your first step. Okay, the taxpayers have agreed to move forward with these projects, and then it's in your hands to kind of go down which projects are going to get funded specifically, and you can do those in those subsequent resolutions.
if the referendum passed and there wasn't a high enough turnout that the commission felt comfortable, you could.
You're not obligated
Not
to
obligated to still issue.
do anything.
The referendum just authorizes you to move forward. It doesn't compel you to.
So get a project list, get a price, figure out what projects are on that price, what millage we'd be looking at. And then, well, then you guys have to, I think you have to decide, do you tie it to one of our already scheduled elections? Do you hold a separate election so that people can look at it that way? Like, how do you, I think if you want voter turnout, you put it on one of our regularly scheduled. If you want it not to turn into a silly season of campaigning, well, Monty's for this and, he's trying to tax you, increase your taxes 3 mills because he wants to fix roads. That's what, we can be a little bit more objective. What? That's true. That's very true.
It's that side of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Real quick on that, recently we did, go and do special election versus, major election to see what the turnout was. And
It's like
I mean,
12%.
yeah, it's teens at best.
But we're at
typically.
18% when
With the
we're
regular.
on, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're not getting a high turnout.
Yeah, so you look at you evaluate the cost of
Yeah.
hosting that, special election, and typically it just goes on with the,
But it also, in my mind, it lets the commission know for sure people are voting on this, and they really thought about that. I mean, we just had a separate special election, and that procedure, you had to get more than 50% of the population to turn out to vote, and we did. And so, I mean, it kind of sets the bar pretty high, and then not only did the people want it, but they really wanted it because more than 50% of the potential voters showed up to vote, All right. The next topic is going to take us a long time, so.
well, thank you for
We
having us.
appreciate you guys coming out. We can't wait to see how many hundreds of millions of dollars the roads are now. Okay. That's one. Mr. Jones, are you going to introduce our Regional Advanced Wastewater Treatment Plant project, or is Dallas going to do that? No?
Oh, I'm happy to defer to you, Jamie. Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners, we're going to move into some funding conversation.
I'm sorry. Hang on. Hey, this next one's going to take us a while. I'm sorry.
Disrupt the whole
If
thing.
you had a separate conversation, if you'll just step into the lobby, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners, as you know, we're facing some obstacles in the funding of our wastewater treatment plant.
Challenges.
Opportunities for improvement. There you go. So tonight, we're going to have a pretty in-depth conversation about some options we have to close the gap on the funding. So with us tonight, we have our funding team from Woodard and Curran. That includes Tammy Ray Ross, who is the National Fiscal Solutions Leader, Tom Bryant, who's the National Planning Leader. I believe by telephone, we have Ethan Wilson, who's a Projects Coordinator, and then you may remember Morgan French, who is a trader and left us after serving as our Grants Manager, but she is the Regional Fiscal Solutions Leader, and we'll never forgive her. So I will invite Morgan to the podium. We recognize your bag, by the way. Did you recognize all the knives in my bag?
I'll take it. Well, I'm happy to say that she's with Woodard and Curran. I don't know what we would do without her at this point. So, thank you all for having us. We're here to talk about a very critical subject. probably the greatest asset the city owns, which is your wastewater treatment facility. And what we want to really talk about tonight is what has gotten us to where we are in 2024 along the path of upgrading the system. And now some of the decisions to be made on how we proceed from this point forward through the construction phase. So if you'll bear with us,
Before
we're
you
going
get started, actually, could I just say, yeah, you guys don't have to, we're gonna be here for a little bit, so sit down, but I just wanna say thank you, because, you know, the state is the one that put, we gotta be in advanced treatment on us. And these guys, despite that, have successfully got us the $40 million that we need to be at, so that we could renovate our existing plant, we could add on and create an advanced treatment, right? So, I want that to be the first thing anybody is watching at home to hear is, what we're gonna be talking about is, you know, we can serve our existing customers, and thanks to these guys, we've got the funding to do that. So the question is gonna become, for the opportunity to grow for all of the developers that are coming in, how are we gonna pay for that growth? And that's kind of what we're talking about tonight. But I don't want anybody at home hearing that anybody that's in an existing house is going to be paying for that, because we've got the funding to make an advanced treatment plant that can serve our existing residents right now today, thanks to these guys, and we appreciate that. I didn't mean to interrupt, but go
No,
ahead.
very well said, Mayor, very well said. So, the mayor is spot on. We, started this initiative in 2020. The city, recognized the need to upgrade your existing wastewater treatment facility just based on the age of the facility itself. These facilities have a life cycle like anything else that you purchase. It's a capital investment. And we knew that we were getting close to the end of that life cycle on some of the pumps and motors, et cetera. We also recognized your capacity limitations with the plant and recognized it was time to start planning. DEP asked us to start doing that at about 80%. So we began that process of the preliminary engineering in 2020. That engineering report was completed in 2021. The city, in July 21st of 2021, received an AO, which is an administrative order. That's what AO means, not consent order, but administrative order, requiring the city to do advanced wastewater treatment. Until July of 2021, we did not recognize that we could not just upgrade our existing facility with traditional 2020 permit limits. And now, as of July of 2021, we recognize, hey, we have to do not only 5.5 on those permit limits, but we have 2 additional permit limits we have to live with. So now we have to do what's referred to as a 5531 facility, advanced wastewater treatment. That comes at a cost, right? And so, as we planned for advanced wastewater treatment throughout 2021, our estimated cost of improvement went from $20 million roughly with the traditional treatment method to now $40 million for the advanced wastewater treatment method. That's on your existing capacity, which currently serves your customer base, and some additional capacity that was available for you to be able to offer service to the city of Archer, or town of Archer. So throughout that process of 2021 and moving into 2022, recognizing that our cost has now doubled, $20 million to $40 million, we started the process of design. Design is now 100% complete, and permits have been applied for by your current engineering firm, which is a combination of Adkins and Black & Veatch. The engineer's estimated cost of the facility today has yet doubled again. The numbers that we've been provided are around $89 million for this facility. This is a 1.2 million gallon per day facility. Now, again, we have successfully paid for advanced wastewater treatment for your current customer base through a number of methods. And Morgan French is going to share with you all the hard work for the last 2 years that's gone into trying to make up that $40 million at the lowest cost possible for your current users. And it also allows for some capacity for that interlocal agreement that we've signed with the city of Archer. So in saying all of that, I want Morgan to walk you through that level of effort, where we stand right now with agreements, the amount of money that's available, But I want you to recognize that the difference between the $40 million that we have acquired today and the need of what could potentially be, the project has not bid yet, engineering cost estimate-wise could potentially be $49 million. That $49 million is adding capacity at your treatment plant for future growth. And what we don't do is require an existing customer base that has paid for this capital cost, has paid for this treatment facility, will now pay a portion to upgrade this treatment facility to pay for that additional growth. Growth must pay for itself. That's the rule of thumb, right? And so as she's talking through these numbers, just keep in mind that over here, we have paid for current customer base and Archer. And we have a number of things that are in that mix that she'll share with you. Over here is the additional demand placed on the city by potential development that would occur over the next 20 years, which is the expected life cycle of this new treatment facility. And again, this is the largest asset owned by the city. So this is, some critical thinking, some critical decision-making, and we do have a path forward, but it's going to mean that we have to really think that through, and you guys have to make some decisions. So we truly appreciate your time. This is going to take a little bit to walk through this. We want all the questions that you guys have. We'd love to answer them. But again, our focus from day one has been to make sure that your existing customer base pays as little as possible for this advanced treatment that's being placed on the city as a demand by the DEP. That's something we can't get out of. That's by 2026. So just remember that's kind of our timeline and our schedule.
I know this is gonna sound crazy, Mr. Mayor, but what if we don't meet that timeline? Are they gonna come shut our city down?
Well,
I really would like to know.
I hope we never have to find out, right? So let's
I mean, what can they do to us?
yeah. Well, again, that's something I hope we never have to find out either, But I would say that I would love to hear how we got to where we're not charging our existing, that we've got the 40 million. We can meet our agreement with the city of Archer. We've got that capacity, and we've still got a little bit of room for some of those things. But when we get to the, how do we decide to move forward, I just want to prepare you that there is a pretty good path forward. Actually, I think it's the right path forward, but it's a completely different model of growth than what we have done in the past. And so we're going to need to be ready to kind of shift mental gears when we get to it. And sometimes that happens quick, and sometimes that happens after about an hour. For me, I think it was an hour and a half. But it finally did click in my head. I'm like, okay, we're just talking about a completely different model of how we do this. So with that as a teaser, let's go back to. All right, go ahead.
How do we get from 40 million to 80 some odd, 89 million?
We're already going to be here till midnight.
Well, this is the question I want to know.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, Commissioner,
I think Jamie's probably
is-
best
is
to,
that
but
a-
you might know the answer.
Is that a engineering flaw from the beginning, or I find it hard to believe that there's been 110% increase in cost over that period of time?
so one thing is to keep in mind, this is an engineering cost estimate at the point of design completion. This project has not been bid to date. An engineering cost estimate incorporates 20% contingency layers throughout it to protect the project and protect the client, meaning that when you bid a project, one of the Florida statutes, the rule says that you must have funds encumbered to build that project. So to date, we have not bid the project. We don't know if those numbers are completely accurate or maybe a little high. So that number that you've heard, again, is a preliminary number, and I think you will see adjustments in that once the project is bid. But right now, we have to make assumptions based on what's being provided by the engineer. Now, part of that also is that our economy has changed. Cost of goods and services and everything else in our world, including eggs and milk, has gone up dramatically, right? So I think that has an impact on that number. The other thing that has an impact on the number is is that there are some additives in there to help pay for that future growth that we're talking about, which needs to pay for itself. So I think that's going to be, you're going to understand a little bit better why that number has doubled when we get through talking through this scenario.
And I want to give Jamie the chance to respond to it too, but I think the most important thing I heard there is if we can make the numbers work at 90 million and it comes in anything less, then we're golden, right? We just got it on paper. We got to make sure that the numbers work in worst case scenario at 90. If we can do that, then we're in pretty good shot. Jamie, is there anything that Miss Tammy missed?
Well, the direction I gave the engineering firm from the get-go with the project, we didn't want anything with bells and whistles. We didn't want anything that was exotic or new age or, first of its kind. We wanted a good, solid Chevrolet. We wanted quality equipment that would be lower cost to maintain long-term, rather than pay that down the road by going with a lower grade of equipment. This is a cost estimate that has soft cost. It has all of the built-in safety factors that Tammy spoke to, where they want to make sure they got contingency, and that contingency may be compounded. I've spent a tremendous amount of time with contractors bringing them to the site and walking them through the 60% and the 100% design plans and specifications. The contractors, based on that windshield evaluation and back at a napkin review of our documents, feel that this is a $50 to $60 million project. That being said, she has to demonstrate funding to move forward for that cost estimate. You cannot move forward and say, well, we think it's going to be 60 million, so we have funding for 60 million.
It's a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, and the other question is, the percent that Archer is paying, is that based on the 40 million or the 89 million?
They pay a percentage of the cost of construction. So they are basically they're prepaying the cost of construction on 175,000 gallons of capacity a day. So if that comes in at $40 a gallon, it's 40 times that capacity. If that comes in at $75 a gallon, it's 75 times that cost of capacity. And our agreement says that we will true up, not only, based on the bids, but at the completion of the project, if there's anything unfounded or increases or decreases during actual construction.
That idea that Archer is paying it at prepaying is going to become important later. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, again, thank you for having us tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and apologize for everybody in the audience because I'm not sure what happened with formatting when we moved the presentation over. Okay, good deal. So just to further expand on some of the history that Tammy went through previously, we've went through numerous funding agencies with the state, numerous programs to help pay for some of the pre-construction and construction costs related to your advanced wastewater treatment plant project. So we have went through FDEP, the State Revolving Fund program on the clean water side. We've went through 3 different legislative appropriation cycles. We've gotten right at $3 million just through legislative appropriation cycles over the past 4 years. We have 2 different fiscal year wastewater quality grants as well that's going towards the payment of your design and permitting and your construction for this plant over the past few years. So we do have some additional applications in processing that right now we do not have agreements on, but they are in processing. They are in technical review with some of the different federal and state agencies that our team is going back and forth to try to get some answers on if we're going to, what amount of those are going to be low interest loan, what amount of those are going to be grant, so on and so forth. Those include USDA rural development, EPA, the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, that's WIFIA, and the Swanee River Water Management District Springs application, which I'm sure you guys have heard plenty about. That's our big one, the $49 million that would hopefully help make up our delta to get the funds encumbered that we need to put this treatment plant on the street. So I'll go in a little bit more detail on that. So originally back in 2020, when we thought we were just going to be at a $40 million treatment plant, we went into the Clean Water SRF program and requested it was about $275,000 for planning money. We did receive 49% of that in principal forgiveness at that point. We then seen that we needed land acquisition for the expansion of the plant. So we went back to the FDP Clean Water State Revolving Fund and we requested $1.35 million for land acquisition. We did not receive principal forgiveness on that portion just because that was not eligible at the time. Beyond that, whenever planning was approved and land was acquired, we were then given the green light to go into the design and permitting phase for the treatment plant project. So we went into SRF and we requested design dollars, and they gave us a total of that 1.9 million that you see under the approved principal forgiveness column, and principal forgiveness for planning and design. Beyond that, we went into the Water Quality Improvement Grant Program. The first year, we were successful in obtaining $3.95 million to go towards pre-construction and construction of this project. We then coupled and was able to roll that agreement into a legislative appropriation agreement from fiscal year 22-23. That was our biggest legislative appropriation agreement to date at $2.5 million. So that agreement's up under one agreement number WG087. The next year, we went back into that same Water Quality Improvement Grant Program, and we requested money for project management, bidding, and construction, and we were awarded $4 million with a $4 million match, which was coming from our loan from the State Revolving Fund and other legislative appropriation dollars to go towards the project. We then moved into our fiscal year 23-24 legislative appropriation cycle. We requested project management and construction funding that cycle, and we were awarded an additional $1 million to go towards this project. And then for fiscal year 24-25 legislative appropriation, we requested funding for the early procurement of equipment and materials that have long lead times that were affecting the ability for us to meet our construction schedule for this project. And then beyond that, we put the other funds towards construction, and we were awarded $750,000 through that initiative. Right now, pending, again, we have our Springs grant pending at 49.8. Currently, we are expecting awards to be announced in December. However, that same cycle, the due dates for those applications were pushed by about 4 weeks. So the governor pushed the due date 2 different times to encourage additional communities to apply to that program. Therefore, we could potentially, that award date might be pushed a little bit just because, staff has to review these things, go through Q&A. They might not be able to meet that December meeting, but that's what we're hoping for is December announcements. Beyond that, if you see line item 13, that's our interlocal agreement between Newberry and Archer. That $13 million number, please keep in mind, again, like Jamie said, like Tammy said, that amount is not exact. That is based on 14.6% of the $89.757 million latest engineer's cost estimate. However, that's going to go up or down based on the bids that we get back for what Archer's portion would be. So that $13 million number, that's a placeholder. So just keep that in mind. And then line item 14, that is USDA. So right now we have submitted a USDA application, and what we're doing at this point with USDA's technical team and their state engineer is we are going back and forth on the preliminary engineering report and the environmental assessment report that was done back in 2020, 2021. And answering their questions on that. So we are still pending, and we do not know at this point what they will offer us in grant versus loan until those items are complete, but we're working on that, kind of week to week, trying to push that forward as quickly as possible. Does anybody have any questions so far before we move on any of that to date?
Commissioner Farnsworth.
So right now, like I said, we're going through the comments that we got back from the state engineer on the preliminary engineering report and environmental assessment. We're working through those comments. They're not as much Q&A as they are updates because, as you know, USDA kind of constantly updates their guidance and what they call a bulletin for items that we have to meet in their planning documents and their environmental assessments. So we're having to update that because, unfortunately, our planning document, again, is from 2020, 2021. So we're having to update some of those items. I would say once those are complete, potentially within, by the end of September at the latest, we should have a good idea of what they would offer us in loan versus grant. I would say middle of October is what I'm hoping for. Again, this is USDA, might move a little bit slower than that. They've had a pretty good turnover over there, so it might move just a little bit slower, but that's what we're hoping for.
I think Jamie wants to weigh in on that point.
I just would like to take this time to thank the funding team and the amount of effort that they put into it. In 32 years of doing this, dealing with multiple funding programs, I've never seen anybody be that successful in that many programs in that short a window of time, ever.
Yeah, that's why I think that's why I wanted to say at the beginning. I want to say it more than once. You know, we can renovate our station to meet state standards right now. We've got that funding is available. We can meet our commitments to Archer, and we still got some wiggle room in there, right? And that needs to be the main message: is that our city is still strong, and we've got the money to do what we want. The question is, who pays for the next 20 years? That's how we're going to do that. Okay. Any other questions about how we got covered to that first 40? No?
Okay,
All right.
and just to kind of highlight, once again, to make sure we're all on the same page, is that is covering existing ratepayers' portion of this upgrade and expansion to our treatment plant. So the additional 60.4%, to be exact, that kind of falls back on growth. And the state, while we would love to go out and get, this project 100% grant funded for the full 1.2 MGD expansion at a 5531 advanced waste treatment quality, the state believes that growth pays for growth, and, that's just not something that they are going to allow. And they, do not agree with existing ratepayers to have to pay for that 60.4%, and I don't either. So beyond that, we do have some additional considerations for you guys to just kind of look into and consider as far as next steps, because we do have a path forward to get us there, and all the hard work that, Mr. Mayor, the commission, city staff has done through planning and design to get to the end goal of a 1.2 MGD plant. We do have a path to get there. It's just going to take a little bit more work and a little bit more digging into developer agreements and that side of things. So furthermore, we've got USDA grant loan amount undetermined in processing. EPA WIFIA also in processing. But the FDP State Revolving Loan Fund Program request for inclusion that we previously submitted for the $89.7 million, that is why we're here tonight. And that has what's been postponed due to repayment insufficiency. So what we want to talk about as far as next steps is how we get there if we are unsuccessful with the $49.892 million Springs grant request that we have into the state right now. Your turn. Thank you.
Wondering why all of this came together so quick and fast is because of Morgan. She views Newberry as family, and she has been ruthless about pushing these programs forward. I thought you were from Newberry.
Sister, I hunt birds in 2/8.
Well, we don't go too far.
Don't tell him that. He'll be there next time he comes hunting.
Killing birds.
We cousins.
Yeah.
We might be cousins too. So,
Will you introduce yourself just for the record, folks watching?
I'm Tom Bryan. I work with these ladies at Woodard & Curran, and I'm an engineer, and as you know, every funding program usually has an engineering element.
And Tom, would you move that microphone just a little bit? You're just a little taller than your counterparts there.
Is that better?
That's a little better, yeah.
Okay. So I want to congratulate you guys. What we're looking at here is an impact fee study. So you hired the best company in the nation, Roftellus, to do your impact fee study about 2 years ago. And they rolled up a number. Now, we use them every chance we get across the country, and we team with them, and they do a great job. And we have anybody we can choose. So your existing impact fee is $5 million. That's for water and wastewater. Now, think about it. You can't build a septic tank and a drain field and a water well and a hydrodynamic tank and all the electric controls for $5 million. I mean, for 5,000, yeah, thank you.
I say, if I can't do it for $5 million.
You could, y'all don't go too far with my mistakes here, so. But so, so they rolled up a number and they're saying 14 million. Well, how'd they get there? 14,000. I just got that.
It's getting late at night.
14,000.
Everything we talk about billions.
Yeah, I'm just getting used to.
It'll be
I'm just
14
getting
million
used to
by
a
the time
billion.
we get to the end of this meeting.
But, so I have to keep things simple, and here's what they did. How'd they get the number? If I'm selling pizza, and I have a pizza that's $10, and it has 10 slices, it's $1 a slice. Well, they did the same thing. So Jamie's selling wastewater service, and he happens to have 3,000 customers. And his system is valued at X, and his customers are Y. They just took one, divided them by the other. So that's simple, but it's a complex process to put a value to your existing system, because it starts at the connection to the house, and the gravity system to the lift station, and the lift station and the force main to the next manhole, all the way up to the headworks, through the treatment plant. Don't correct me if I leave something out. And then right on out to the spray field. So that's what you're selling. I was selling a pizza, you're selling wastewater. I had 10 slices, you had 3,000 people. And at the end of the day, they rolled it up and said, today's value of that system is 14,000, not million, per ERC, per home, equivalent residential connection. Because you may have some business that it's equal to 10 homes in their demand for water. And so an ERC roughly uses 250 gallons per day. That's 100 gallons per person a day, 2.5 persons per home. So, and what's surprising is we ran through these numbers the past couple of days. This was done 2 years ago. But even with the new numbers, that's still a reasonable number if you guys can warm up to that. They had a lower capital cost they were dealing with than what we just were talking about, 80-something million. And, but these.
And before you move on, but what he just said, this study's 2 years old. If you did the same study today, that 14,000 would be 20,000, whatever, right? So that 14 it's 2 years old at this point because the cost keeps going up. I didn't want to cut you off.
Mayor, that was a critical point that I left out. I'm glad you called me on that because this number's working based on the old numbers before all this escalation. So they did a good study. That's a good number. I bought into it. Hopefully you guys can buy into it. So let's see, we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, you've got a clicker right there. If the battery dies on us, let us know.
Thank you, Morgan. I can barely function without Morgan. So, okay, so let me go back to my pizza story. I'm selling pizza. And I have a group of friends in high school and say, hey, we're hungry, want to get that pizza, that large pizza with 10 slices. And so everybody says, yeah, I'll take 2 slices and I'll take 1 and I'll take 3. And so I tally it all up. I need 2 large pizzas. I pick them up, I go back to all my buddies, and when I arrive, one buddy found out across town he could get pizza with free beer, so he checked out. And 2 other buddies didn't realize they didn't have any money. They forgot their wallet. And one buddy, Mom said, come home and eat. So now I've got this pizza that I bought and paid for, these 2 pizzas, and I'm not going to go broke, so I just divide the cost of who's left for that pizza. So that slice went from $1 to about $2.50 a slice. So I said, so the next week, everybody wants to go have pizza. And I said, y'all pay up first and then I'll go buy it. So that's where you guys are today. Everybody wants pizza, but they don't have any skin in the game till they pay for it. And then when I get back, if one went home to eat dinner with mom and one went to the better deal with the beer, I've got their money, I'm made whole. And that pizza just sits there, I can give it to somebody else. So that's where,
Now, see, if he had started with that metaphor with me earlier today, I would have got it quicker. That's a good metaphor.
especially
But
the guy with the free beer.
But, I mean, this conversation is making me truly rethink, because as you guys know, we have developments that get approved, and this isn't quite right, but let's just say when they get approved, their capacity gets reserved right away. Doesn't quite happen that way, but let's say it does. Well, then some of these developments, they were approved 20 years ago. So now they've got reserved capacity, but they haven't paid any connection fees for it. And we've been paying the operating expenses to run a plant that has enough capacity for them, and they haven't actually connected. So we've got to build a plant, and they don't have to pay. We have the same problem when it comes to impact fees and roads, right? Well, I got 500 houses. They don't pay the impact fee until they build the house, they get the permit. Well, we've got to wait till that money collects up to have enough money to go fix the road. Well, they can be 300-400 houses in before we have enough money, and everybody has to deal with that traffic, which is what, you always hear people say, well, it's a rock and a hard place. Are we going to make the existing residents pay up front and get the money back? So in my brain, it's kind of slowly getting rewired here about how we should be doing this, because when I think we've been paying to operate and maintain a wastewater facility, because right now, on paper, we're at 100%, right? On paper.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we're right at 100%.
And in practicality, we're at 60, 50, 55. So all that capacity is locked up, but none of those folks have paid a connection fee yet, right? And yet we still have to operate a plant that has 45% more carrying capacity, and nobody's paying that fair share in. And we're carrying the cost.
Excellent point. So it's all about transfer of risk. So I took on the risk when I bought the 2 pizzas, and they didn't have any skin in the game. When I came back, I could have bought just 1 pizza, but I shared that cost among everybody that was left. And that's not what you want to do here. You don't want to share a developer's cost with your existing customer base, because they can't leave. They're a captive audience, but the developers can leave. The economy tanks, they bail out. Economy's booming, they might commit to 100 homes, but they could sell 200 or 300 homes. So it's a funny game, but it's just right back to that simple pizza story. Are you willing to take on the risk and then assume the losses? And you guys are making that decision, for you and your customer base, your ratepayers. But most communities now, they don't take that risk. They will not put their existing customer base that's already paid that impact fee, paid it years ago, and they're enjoying their, now true, the machine's kind of worn out, so it has to be renewed and replaced. So your rate base is paying their pro rata share of that facility, because you really have 3 players: Newberry customers, Archer customers, and developer customers. And as everybody said to this point, Newberry and Archer have their game plan together. They know what money is involved, and you really did a great agreement with Archer. That was a developer agreement, in my opinion. You said you're going to buy how much? 175,000 gallons?
175,000 gallons.
At $40 a gallon, here's your number. But we don't know what the final number is yet until the bids come in. So you just made it a percentage. So that was 14.7%. So that was an excellent agreement. Well thought. It was a one-off, but it matched that community. It matched this community. It matched what you're doing. So you'll want to do the same with the developers. And those serious developers will step right up, and the others that have just sketched lines on a piece of paper, they may back off. But anyway, so this, it's all taken care of in the developer agreement. Now, you can come up with a basic concept, that is, we can't borrow money to build the plant until we get commitments from the developer, and the commitments have to have teeth, which means maybe it's a bond that backs it up. Maybe they pay it all up front. Maybe they pay a part of it up front and a little bit as they build homes. Let's say they need to build 100 homes to meet debts, your debt service. So they need to pull 100 permits and pay that impact fee of $14,000. But if they don't build them, times are bad and they only build 10 homes, they still have to make up the difference because you guys still have to make that debt payment to the banker, to the SRF program.
Just to draw one more comparison, when we were thinking about, okay, what infrastructure can we do with our newly adopted impact fees? The philosophical question up here was always, well, what number do you want to bet on that we're going to build, right? Do you take out debt thinking that we're going to build 250 homes a year and that's what we bond? Well, what happens then if you only build 150, right? And we sat up here many meetings having that very conversation. And for this, the bank is saying they're not taking that risk, right? Because it's not like we say, well, you got connection fees and we'll build 200 homes and then the market collapses and you're only building 90 homes. We still have to pay the bank, right? And so the bank wants to know how you're going to make up those 110 homes that you didn't build that you based it on. And so that's, in essence, just trying to make a correlation to a recent conversation that I think has strong parallel implications. Commissioner Martin.
So I'm an insurance background guy. I understand the shifting of the risk. I understand this beginning of this conversation about they're basically pre-ordering capacity, putting their deposits down, just like if I was going to pre-order something. I pre-ordered a generator 2 weeks ago. How they begin the prepayment or payment in full sort of remains to be seen. If the developer goes bankrupt, talk to me how that looks for us on our side of the equation if they've not paid it in full ahead of time before they went bankrupt.
So I used to run the water utility in Tallahassee, and we had a big boom like you guys. Well, not as big. You're the second fastest growing city in Florida. But we had a big boom, and we had some developers fly in and go bankrupt. And we had a lot of them hit a home run. But the ones that go bankrupt, you want to get a bond. You want them to pony up a bond. And sure, yes. 3%, maybe that's what you charge based on their commitment. But you're going to evaluate your risk too. You're going to say, has this guy done this before? Has he built 100 homes? The insurance companies vet it. And if they're too high of a risk, if this is their first time out, they probably can't get a bond, which means they can't play. But that, there's a lot of ways that we can get to the developer guarantee to the city. So the city's got an agreement with the state, says, yeah, we'll borrow the 50 million or whatever we're borrowing, because there's a lot of grant money, but we're going to borrow X dollars at 1%, 20 years, and we'll be paying every 6 months. So that agreement's in place and we can't deviate. Now you want an agreement, I call it a pass-through agreement, from the people that are buying your capacity, that they're going to either pay it all up front or come up with a method that will satisfy a banker that they're not going to default. And
Yeah, that all makes sense to me, and I think the surety bond answers the question.
Okay.
Are there other examples of what they can do to ensure that the city is made whole despite what their business climate looks like day one or day 3 years?
So, as Tom said, these get quite complicated, the agreements, and they could use, there's a multitude of ways to do that. One of the things we talked about earlier today is the possibility of the agreements being written in a way where the developer may purchase X amount of gallons for their development, and if the development were to either falter or just not move forward for some unknown reason, there would be a clause in the agreement that says they have the ability to sell that back to the city.
Or to a different
at
developer.
the same rate. The city would be the first option. If the city says we want to buy it because we can sell it to a different developer, and we would like to see that project move forward, and we need the capacity, then you get first option. If you say, no, we got plenty of capacity, we don't want to buy that now, then that developer can actually allow, that developer agreement can allow that land to change hands to another purchaser with that capacity that's already been purchased. So it can go with the land.
Kind
Yeah, that way it's not resold, because if it's not written that way, the developers in turn could sell that capacity for 3 times what they paid for it. But in order to encourage economic development, you want it to exchange hands with the purchase of the property. At the same rate, absolutely, because it's already pre-purchased.
Jamie, are you?
That gives him the same guarantee that that developer had. He transfers with the land, he keeps making the payment obligation, he's guaranteed that capacity, and he's actually mitigated his risk against future increases to the development charges.
I buy it today, it's mine.
We can get real creative. I mean, the previous slide, 14,000, not million. They could pay half up front, 7,000. The other half they could pay as they build homes. This is just a scenario. Maybe they don't pay anything up front. They pay as they build the homes. But if they need 100 homes a year to cover your debt service and they only build 50, they're going to have to pay that other 50 out of pocket. And they're going to have to still provide a bond. Because if they've gone bankrupt, or if they've left town, or if they're just not happy about how quick the homes are building, somebody's got to pay on their end, because you have to pay.
You still got.
So if this is, maybe I'm wrong, but it sounds like this is sort of kind of a new thing that cities are doing. You're saying the cities don't want to take on this risk per se. So there has been developed a market within the insurance space that these sureties for these sorts of things are not as new. You're shaking your head yes. So they do have a market to go to. We're not just speculating, right?
Right.
We're not blazing a trail.
Okay.
Well, and let's see, go ahead.
Well, let me interject, Tom. While the bond piece of it may be newer and the market to go to, this process isn't new. I've done this my entire career, specifically in Bay, in the same situation. And what I explained to some folks earlier today, this typically happens and gets enacted in the city when it gets to be about this size and they're in this situation. So there's numerous examples that they have with agreements styled similar for all over the state. It's something that dates back to the early 90s.
And I don't believe, but you guys correct me if I'm wrong, that the intent is for you guys to pick one option and go with that. I think the idea is that we come up with 2, 3, 4 options, and then you put that in front of the developer, and the developer then says, this one works for me, that one works for me. I don't know how many options becomes too many options. It's hard to manage, but we don't want to say we did this and then that doesn't work for everybody. And I think that there is still room for someone to kind of pay as they go, but the risk there for them is that the capacity may not be there for them because we're going to pre-sell that capacity. So if you want to take that risk, that's on you, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. The plant that's been designed, Jamie has thought this through, not just for 20 years, but for 50. And so the plant has capacity now for the 20-year life cycle, which is required by DEP. But Jamie has had additional footprint kind of outlined and designed for this plant, that if you want to pull the trigger on that 5 years from now or 10 years from now, that's going to be there for you to be able to do that when you need it. So he's thinking way in advance of your future needs, which, if you have a developer come that, demands 0.6 MGD, you have that footprint there that the developer can pay for the capacity, and you can move forward with constructing that capacity. So that's a great position to be in for the future demand. I do want to say that, going back to the opening slide, when I said we were developing the preliminary engineering report in 2021, One of the things that was in the engineering report, and it's actually one of the alternatives DEP looks for in their planning documents, is what if you do nothing? What if you just do nothing? What is that going to cost you over 20 years to do nothing? Well, we went into it thinking we actually had that as an option, right? What if we do nothing? The aging infrastructure continues to age, this happens, that happens, what's the cost of that? How is your operations cost going to go up? But then DEP stepped in and said doing nothing's no longer an option, you have to have advanced wastewater treatment. But right now, you're at a crossroads where going AWT is an option, connecting Archer in your interlocal agreement is an option. But what happens if you don't build the added capacity for the developments that are interested in coming to Newberry? What happens is you cannot issue permits and the development stops. So that's the crossroads that we're facing right now. So what we're trying to do is bridge that with a moderate solution.
Before we leave that point, I'm gonna go to Commissioner Coleman. Just don't forget that all of our budgets are based on impact fees from that growth. Commissioner Coleman?
Do you see track builders getting, they'll run away from this, or?
So that's a really good question. So I've been doing this 32 years, and we've done it all over the state of Florida and across the country. I've seen a mixture of reaction, honestly. What I've mostly seen, and you had a neighboring community we used as an example earlier of Alachua, where we were at the very same crossroads that you guys are facing now. And Alachua said, well, we want to know what our developers think. Like, can we call a meeting? Can we bring them in and let them tell us what their thoughts are on what they plan to do for the future and what they would buy into and accept as a result of this? So we actually did that in an auditorium because we realized there would be, a significant number of people for that meeting. And we laid everything out as we have with you, which it's just the facts. It's just the numbers associated with where you are and what you're facing. And we did that for Alachua. And at the end of that presentation, the developers that were, excited, ready to go, were real, true in what they were saying that they needed and wanted and how they were going to process that, exercise that. They signed up that very day. They said at the podium, just like I'm talking to you now in front of the microphone, what are you waiting on? Like, without this, my property values are less. Without this, I can't build 100 units. I can only build 10. Without this, I have to put septics in. Without this, my development is delayed. And so it was an overwhelming response. Now, there were 2 or 3 that left. They just said, we're not ready to pull the trigger quite yet. Like, we may be back in 3 years, and we'll talk to you then. But the economy is not quite what we want it to be right now. Things aren't as stable as we'd like to see them. We're just not going to hedge our bets today. And they departed. But what happened, which was a great result of that conversation, was the city did not overbuild their treatment plant, expecting that development to come within a couple of years and have to live with that added capacity that would not have been sold, that would have cost them an O&M cost annually to operate, maintain. When he's running that plant, when Jamie's running that plant, he's paying the insurance bill, whether he's running 1,000 gallons through it or 100,000 gallons through it. He's paying the electric costs on all those pumps and motors and blowers and all those, whether he's running 1,000 or 100,000. So that cost is real. You all are assuming it. It's going up every day. People, chemicals, energy. It's not going down. It's going up. So overbuilding is certainly not what we want to do either. So I think, that the lesson learned in Alachua was that having the developers tell the city the true intention and sign up saying, these are real, allowed Alachua to really evaluate what they needed to build. And they did it right. And today, they still have capacity at that treatment facility. It's about 12 years old now, I think, but still has capacity.
Okay, Commissioner Martin?
Tammy, on his point, are there tools that are available to the smaller builder versus the track builder? Or are we setting ourselves up for a scenario that only favors one type of builder
Big
versus
guys.
another?
Yeah, it is a good question because, the last thing that we want to do is leave out the local builders or the folks that might not be quite as ready as some of the others. So we have probably 7 examples of how that can work through a development agreement process. And what the city staff, I think Dallas was actually the one that suggested it earlier, is that we do want to have multiple opportunities. One may want to purchase today 100,000 gallons because they know they're going to use it over 2 or 3 years. That 100,000 gallons, when they purchase it, when you buy it, it's bought. It's yours. You own it. You guys can't sell it again. It's sold. It's capacity at that plant that is there for when they need to use it. But if I'm a smaller developer and I say, I don't need 100,000 gallons today, I want to buy 10 a year for the next X number of years, because that's what I can afford to do, then his 10 will be there when he purchases it, right? But what about next year or the year after when he comes back? You guys may be out of capacity. And he might not be able to buy that 10 right then. He may have to wait again for similar processes what we're in now to plan, design, and construct the next phase. Or buy it from someone else, or build it and turn it over to you guys under your parameters. There's a lot of options out there. But the cost of building and turning it over to the city versus what you're talking about in this median range impact fee, they don't compare. The cost is much higher. It's harder to get operators to run those facilities, so they're trying to give them over to cities because it's difficult to keep that stuff maintained and operated.
Tammy, is it up to us to potentially limit what any one particular developer can buy at a time to keep one builder from monopolizing the entire capacity?
I think that would be something that we would have to speak to your attorney about. That would be probably a legal conversation, because there are, restrictions around that type of governance, I believe. So I'm not sure what they are.
And in addition, the pricing, we can't sell at a discount to the larger builder versus the smaller.
Right.
It's the same across the board, correct?
Correct.
But I
If
think
they in turn sell it amongst themselves, we can't control that price.
Right.
Correct?
So the, part of the conversation earlier, you don't want it to where developers can sell one another the capacity, because then it becomes a cap and trade and the highest bidder gets the capacity. You want him to be able to sell it back to the city if he doesn't need it, so we can in turn use that for another development or run with the land. But as far as the small builders, you can waive that capacity, they can bond that capacity. There's a multitude of mechanisms. And at the end of the day, regardless, we don't have to sell all the capacity. We only have to guarantee that we sell enough ERUs to meet the debt service on what we bought. So if 200 ERUs meets the debt service, there's still other capacity that is available to be bought. So there's been some discussion about, the proper growth rate or the amount of growth in residential units and other things. You've got a little bit of built-in control with that. If you're only selling a certain amount, you still have capacity available.
Well,
But it's still a legal discussion.
This is one of the most interesting conversations that I've been a part of since sitting on here, because I like the economics part of it, I like the insurance part of it. It's amazing what the market will solve, because this is what the market is
Exactly.
solving, and
Yeah.
capitalism is solving this issue for not only us from a risk perspective and a financing perspective, but on the buyer's side as well. It's kind of going out to them in the marketplace. So what part of this have we maybe not talked about or not
Hang on.
addressed?
Before we leave this topic, because I think what Tammy said is really important, and if we had this model of growth, we wouldn't be sitting on a plant that's 50%, right? So we could host a meeting, right? And we find out these are the serious folks, right, that are going, and it needs to be 0.8 instead of 1.2. Or we could have that meeting and say, no, we got serious, it should be 1.4, 1.6. Or we may have serious commitments that say, I'm not ready now, but I will be ready in 5 years, and I'll commit in that period of time. But I think with this model, if the developers are paying up front, then our ability to address that is infinitely better than playing this game about, well, we've got this development over here that just got 1,500 houses approved, and when they came in front of us, they were going to be breaking ground in 12 months, and it's been 10 years,
Before we go too far, is the correct verbiage paying upfront versus committing upfront?
I think it's committing
It
up.
sounds like committing.
Committing
is-
upfront,
Is
yeah.
better.
Here's what we have to have. We can't get the money to build this plant until we have guaranteed pledge revenue to meet your debt service. You
Sure.
and the state have an agreement, or will have.
Oh, can you speak into the
Oh,
microphone?
I'm sorry. I was holding
Yeah, I
the place
think
for
we got.
Tammy there.
Yeah, we're good on that point.
So, okay, well, and I did want to back up. You were saying, should we limit the growth or so far you haven't. What Jamie and his team have done is they figured out what the demand was. Unfortunately, we didn't add the caveat that you got to have some skin in the game if we're going to take yours seriously. But anyway, we came up with 1.2 million gallons per day based on the proposed demand. That was existing community, Archer, and new development. And Jamie has pages and pages and spreadsheets of all these developments, what year they're going to build, how many homes, and so forth. And so he made his best guess. Now, since they don't, back to the pizza thing, they can bug out if they want to. Your developer agreements aren't strong enough to bring them to the table so they have skin in the game. And so if somebody comes up and says, Newberry, I want to build, I need 2 million gallons. I want to build, out here a few miles, I need 2 million, not 1.2 million, but 2 million. You guys could say, sure, we can make that happen, which is what we did in Groveland. The man
Because we
said,
could build the plant before they actually needed
yeah.
the 2 million.
Or you could say, you build the plant. You build it to our specs, our standards, our specifications. We're going to watch you build it. And when you're done, you pay for it, engineering, permitting, and so forth. We will take it over as a municipality for ownership, operations, maintenance, renewal, and replacement. It's ours from that point. So there's lots of ways we can do all of this. My opinion to your question is it's all negotiable. There's no cap. There's no minimum. The only minimum is to serve your existing customer base. But there's no cap, and it just depends on how positioned you guys are to manage growth. Because water and sewer is the point of the spear. We used to use water and sewer for annexation in Tallahassee because they knew they could make a lot of money off of ad valorem. And the more people you have inside the city limits, the lower the unit cost is for everybody. So that was their goal, bring in lots of people, police and fire and all that. Higher density equals lower unit cost. But they use water, they would circle up an area in the unincorporated areas of the county. They'd say, if you want our water and sewer, because at the time you could only put one home per 5 acres. And the developers, they'd buy the land, they'd draw a bunch of lines on it and say, this is what we want to do. And it might be 10 or 20 homes per acre, or townhomes. But anyway, that's how they made their money. So, and it was an annexation tool. But you just have to manage. It's not just water and sewer. It's police and it's fire and it's schools and it's grocery stores. If you're ready to manage that kind of growth, right now you're growing at about 6.7%. And it seems like Mike and Jamie and Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and there is some sense of urgency with this. So, tonight, one, you've got to consider what you would take the development fee to. We're trying to demonstrate that we have the debt service to secure funding from FDEP in the February hearings. Right now, I currently have an August 2026 deadline to build the facility. Quite frankly, that's going to be almost impossible to reach if we're not under construction until the second or third quarter of next year. That's provided we get the funding. We're gonna have to try to ask for an extension on that based on, solving this funding scenario. But at the end of the day, it's a simple equation. We can't, if the city cannot move forward and demonstrate financial feasibility to secure the funding for the growth portion of the project, we can't build. And if we can't build, the developers can't build. Doesn't matter who the developer is. We have to solve our issue to solve theirs.
Okay, before we move on, because there's two sections here. There's the connection fee, the development fee, and then there's the developer agreement. And we spent the bulk here talking about shifting our model of a developer agreement to collecting it as they build, which puts the risk on us, to collecting it in some various way ahead of time, collecting a commitment ahead of time that has teeth into it. But we went real quick over, this is still predicated on us getting to that $14,000 connection fee, and I think it's like 10 for one and four for other. Now, I think it's important for the public to hear, and it's important for you guys to hear. Let's say, so we need two things from this body if we want to grow. We need that commitment that we can't go to 14 in 1 year, but we need to have some timetable to get to 14, and then we stick to it, right? And then we have to go rewrite, put some teeth in developers agreements with some options that we think are versatile. Let's say that we get the funding for 90 million, and then we get the hard bids in at 60 million, right? Now we do have the opportunity to come back and say, all right, at $14,000 connection fee, because if it takes us 4 years to get there, right, we'll be long since had the hard bid on that point. Now we can come back and we say, okay, do we need that 14? Does it need to be less? Or does it have to be more than 14 because prices still keep going up? So there's opportunities moving forward to continually reassess what that connection fee needs to be. Remember, the 14 is 2 years old as we sit here and speak. So if we had a $90 million project when we did this study 2 years ago, it wouldn't be 14, it'd be more than that. We can't get to 14 in 1 year, right? It's a 4-year step in, Dallas, to get to 14, 2-year step in?
Mr. Mayor, city staff would propose a 2-year step-in of increasing it to the 9,500 year
50
one.
and 150 and 2?
Correct. State statute allows you to go above the 20 or the 12.5% if you have a study that shows that you need it and you have an extraordinary need. So we have a study that shows that we need it, and we have an extraordinary need in the development and construction of the wastewater plant. So we have plotted out 20 years worth of development and collection of impact fees to make those debt service payments. Staff's current proposal is do a 50% increase this year, do a 50% increase next year, and then after that, every 4 years, increase by 12.5%. That model generates you sufficient funding to make your debt service payments at the full 90 million. To the mayor's point, state statute allows you to reduce your impact fees at any time for any reason. So if we are successful in this grant funding opportunity at 49 million or 20 million or whatever it is, we can come back to the board and say, we no longer need the full 14,000 and we request that you reduce it or not, and you could spend it on a different project, but you always have the ability to reduce your impact fees, not increase your impact fees.
I mean, we do have other things that we do with these impact fees besides just the wastewater. And part of the problem that we have right now is that whenever we initiated all of these things, we just never, we're always trying to promote growth. So, we did a study and they'd say you could have a $6,000 impact fee, and we kind of started at 1, right? And so we weren't really building what we needed to build along the way. So we kind of find ourselves now in a deficit. Same thing would happen with the fire department, right? So, and I'm not saying more or less. I'm just saying that I want the public to hear and you guys to hear, we have the opportunity to reassess these amounts as we move forward. Jamie?
And if a developer has signed a development agreement and he's prepaid some of those impact fees, let's say it's the 14,000, and we come back and identify that the cost of construction is lower. Well, all that is basically a true-up. He didn't buy one ERU worth of capacity. He bought an ERU plus the delta. Does that make sense? So he is now the proud owner of a house and a half, or a house and 3/4. Or if he wants to sell that piece back, because he's overpaid for that ERU.
Is there any more to the presentation, or are we just in deliberation at this point? Okay, so questions? Oh, look at that, perfect. What are we thinking here? Because I think we are under a pretty good timeline here. I like the idea of having a meeting. I think that meeting should be with our local developers, because this is complex, and they're gonna, if we get the developers and these guys in the room, they can talk and ask those kinds of questions.
Right here, this team needs to be with us.
Right. And I, in my mind, that needs to be these guys and the developers to have these conversations, because that's what it's gonna be. I don't I'm happy to join, but I don't think that's a meeting like this. I think that's around a table kind of a thing.
No,
Hey, let's go in line. Commissioner
So-
Clark will just go straight down.
Our impact fees that we pass for our roads
Hang-
and buildings,
Okay, yeah,
that's strictly that impact fee
correct,
when you build a home.
correct.
Now, the wastewater and water is by the ERU when you build a home. So we got the impact fee, we got the development fees, which is still getting charged, and this particular one standalone is just the ERU increase to 14,000.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that is
Water
correct.
and wastewater.
There's
Those
water and
wrapped up as
wastewater.
14.
And understand, take the roads and the public facilities out of it. If a developer has prepaid this capacity, whatever the rate per ERU is, he's not gonna be charged that when he actually pulls the building permit. The only thing he'll be charged when he pulled the building permit is the permit fee, those other, because he's already bought this and secured it, whether that's 1 month in advance or 10 years in advance.
That depends on how we structure.
The
each
options we
builder
give them.
On an option plan to get this paid. Yes, sir.
Okay. Commissioner Farnsworth?
So it doesn't matter if it's at 14,000 and the actual cost comes in at 12,000, the builder still has to pay the 14,000. But if it comes in at 16,000, who eats that $2,000 cost?
We
Oh,
do.
that's where you make sure that you do a good job structuring the wording in your agreement. I firmly believe that the cost of this project is going to be something less than the 89 that the engineers estimated. That being said, and I have been held back this entire time because by state law, you've got to demonstrate the financial feasibility. You won't know for a fact what the damn thing costs until you bid it. And because you got to see what I've tried to drum up the interest in the project for 1.5 2 years. I've been hosting contractors here and spending time with them and building relationships and making them understand who Newberry is and who the project is, because I don't want the first time they hear about Newberry be from a bid service. So every one of these contractors says, like I said earlier, that this appears to be a $50 to $60 million job. So,
But if you have the means, you will save money, because it's gonna take us at least 2 years to get to the 14. So if you guys implement this and I go right now and say, I'm gonna buy mine at whatever it is in year 1, then I know for sure I'm saving whatever the difference is between year 2. And if we're going up 12.5% every 4 years, if I'm not building for 10 years, it's to my benefit to go ahead and purchase my capacity now at the lower rate, because in 15 years, it's definitely going to be 20,000, 22,000, right?
Right.
And I think that we need to figure out that so that we can still pay for the project, right? Because how do you, if I'm, how do I make enough money if I'm selling it all right now? Because somebody could come in and say, I'm gonna buy it all right now, right? So I don't have to pay that. I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's all right, but what if somebody came in and bought like 100 of them, and the economy just crashes, and they say, oh, crap, we're getting out of this game, we're gonna sell them back to you, we're gonna sell,
We don't have to buy it.
we don't have to buy it?
Right.
Okay, okay.
it's bound to the land like covenants. It runs with the
Right.
worst-case scenario. As Tammy mentioned earlier, there's contingency built into that number, there's numbers on top of numbers. So I don't foresee a situation where we get bids in higher than 90, that would drive that 14 above what Raftalis came back as impact fee rate.
Is that, Commissioner Martin, do you remember yours?
I don't remember my original thought. But I don't know, just kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, it feels like this has sort of been taken out of our hands to come up with a number magically. It's kind of taken it out of the developer's hands to come up with the market has really sort of worked it out for both sides of the table, so to speak, which is a little more comforting, from my standpoint. And I like that part. I think I know what I was going to say. The meeting that would take place with the developers, I think you need to be there to make sure that they understand that this has kind of the blessing from us on the dais and not just the two of them talking
Absolutely.
independently.
Commissioner Maison?
I was trying to stay quiet because I still got some packages to deliver, but it's all right, and I got a time frame. But Monty,
We'll all go help after this meeting.
oh yeah,
You give me 5 in my Prius, and man, I can get them done.
As long as I wear your elf hat.
I don't know what you're talking
I need some dog treats though.
I got you covered. So Muncie said that, what if somebody comes in and buys 100, right? What if a developer comes in, buys 100, the economy tanks, he sells the capacity to another developer, he comes in, but he doesn't need the full capacity. And the city won't buy, is he stuck with that?
If the city doesn't buy it back, then the developer.
That's where
Okay.
risk shifting comes in.
So this may sound like crazy, so could he sell the capacity to another land, to another location? I know that is,
Well, we had to change our capacity regulations in my previous employer just for that, because people were buying capacity that had no intention of building. They were buying it for me at X. They were selling it to you to double X, just to recoup the difference. And it became a negotiation cap and trade type thing. So try to bind it to the land. Most places bind it to the land or gives you the right to sell back to the city. You do that right now. If I sell a cemetery lot right now, you can't go sell it to another person. If you want to get rid of it, you got to sell it back to the city.
so until the city's ready for it, he's stuck.
Right.
One other question.
If there was another developer that was interested, if the city knew that developer was moving forward, he could sell it back to the city could then sell it to that other developer.
Don't lose that question, Commissioner Farnsworth. Was there something incorrect, or you just needed to add?
I just need to add to that. So the capacity charge only pays for the capital improvement. We want these people to connect to and start using the facility and start paying a rate fee, because until they connect, we don't charge a rate. So the more people that are connected to the system, the lower the unit cost of the rate is. So we want everybody to connect as quick as possible.
Because until they do, we're eating some of the operating costs.
We have fixed cost, and
That
Commissioner
kind of
Farnsworth?
plays into my question, is there a time limit that they have to actually connect once they purchase the item?
If you pre-purchase the capacity, I've never seen one that made connection mandatory. But to Tom's point, you have ongoing sunk costs in your O&M that are fixed, whether you're treating 1 gallon or 1,000,000 gallons. So the goal is to get them to connect.
And in my mind, the reason why we have so many developments that were approved so long ago and we never even put sunsets on them, and they're sitting there, is because they spent whatever they spent to get the future land use and zoning. But if I have to commit to, however much this is, I'm going to see that one through. I'm going to get started on that because I need to start recouping those costs. So again, I think everybody's got skin in the game here. We can't tie up, all this land in these entitlements that are eating up capacity, and then they're not building the houses, and we're sitting for 10 years on a plant that's running at 30% capacity because we built the plant for you, and then you didn't follow through with building the development. And our development agreements don't have any teeth to compel them to do that. So the more you get, I mean, to me, this is the exact difference between high school kids and their grades and college kids. College already got the money. So they don't really care if you pass or fail or come to class because they already got paid, right? Totally different attitude when you're sitting there in high school on the taxpayer dollar, right?
So not to get too far down in the weeds with it, but at the end of the day, you style the development agreement how you want to. But I would strongly encourage, and I've encouraged everybody I've worked for in my career, to set a window on development orders. The development order is the parent of the development agreement, that it sunsets at X. You move forward. If you don't move forward, any vested right you have, especially if it's a vested right you haven't paid for, goes away. You don't want development orders that are 10 years old, 20 years old. You want to establish that they need to move forward in 2 years and demonstrate some level of movement towards constructing, or at 5 it's gone, would be what I would recommend.
If you need to go, man, I think we're kind of coming to it's a workshop, we're not voting on anything tonight.
A lot of information.
But I think we need to give direction.
I like it.
Hang,
I agree with
hang
you.
on one second, just make sure I can only follow, this late at night, I can only follow one conversation at a time. If that's an important conversation, include us in it.
No, he just asked a question.
Okay.
He asked a question if it could be tied to the purchase of property. That's not something I've really thought about, and that's probably something that a lawyer, not a plumber, should advise you on.
So Dallas, tell us the timeline for when we're going to be asking the commission to vote. I know that the development fees, we've already kind of laid that groundwork. And we got a budget that's breathing down our neck, so that's coming pretty fast. Development agreements, when can we begin to see? I think we should have some of those options prepared before we have the meeting with our developer, so that we can say, here's some of the options that we're considering. If you've got another idea, we're willing to listen. So what's our timeline of actual needing to make decisions?
Mr. Mayor, if we get a head nod from the commission tonight, we'll bring forth the impact fee increases with our rate increases in September, your first and second budget hearings. As the commission may remember, it takes 90 days for those to take effect, so we wouldn't start charging the new fees until January.
That's step one. We need the 14, and now I forgot, let's say this body is ready to go to 14. What does that, are we good to go irregardless of the grant? If we're at 14, or do we still need the grant to even make 14 work?
14 will fund without the grant. 14
Without the
is
grant.
kind of worst case scenario.
Okay,
Development fees.
Correct.
development fees. Right, and all of these words, because impact is, we have an impact fee for roads, we have an impact fee for public buildings, development fees, and we normally talk about as connection fees. So we're kind of shifting our terminology here. So if we go to 14, right, then the project is moving forward, right? We're still these guys are gonna fight hard for that 49 million, because then we'd be able to reassess, right? Okay, now.
The 14 would be the first step in getting us to the financial sufficiency that DEP is looking for.
Right.
The second step is our development agreements. So if the commission is good with the 14 and the step-in plan that staff has proposed of half this year and half next year, we'd bring back those ordinances in September for you to adopt. Concurrently, we're going to start working with the attorney's office, and the community development department, and Jamie and Woodard and Curran, and everybody we can think of to develop those development agreements. We need to have those also in place before our February hearings. We have a number of development agreements that are coming before the board in the next several months. So our first step would be to make sure those development agreements have the language that we've been talking about, have those conversations with those developers that are going to come before the board in the next several months.
Yeah, just to dovetail onto that, the ones that are coming to the board, I would take a pause on. Let us get the language together, make sure there's language and options that you're comfortable with and the DEP is comfortable with, that we can put in those development agreements. So I would take a pause, because you've got some significant ones that want to come to the board right now. I would pause that to give us time to
But
get
we're
the
on a
language.
tight timeline too, so we're not talking about a big pause.
No.
We're just talking about you can't be on the next agenda.
Yeah,
Commissioner
I had one called that wanted to be on the next agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, so what, you're moving to Newberry right now. You're gonna have the impact fee, right?
Wait. Are you moving to Newberry or are you building in Newberry?
I'm building in Newberry.
If you're building in Newberry, all right, so you're creating
gonna
that.
have an impact fee, and
Right.
then now you're gonna have a development fee.
We already have development fees.
Right,
They've
right.
been there. We're talking about an increase to what it would be. So you already have,
What's our development fee gonna be this year?
what is it currently?
Currently, it's $5,000 across. the
$5,000.
Currently 5, so we're going up,
Staff
No,
proposes
we're
going
going
up
up
to
to
9.5.
In 2 years.
95 the first year, 14 the second.
Right.
Staff's recommendation is that you step it in similar to how you
Right.
did the impact.
You, at the last meeting, you wanted to go to 14 right away.
yeah, I wanna go to 14 anyway.
Now
so-
we're gonna step in, give them a little bit of time.
Well, I mean,
The-
it's what it is.
Hang on. And then impact fee, we have an impact fee on road.
Changes based off of the usage and the type.
Right. So the impact fees are all based on square footage or amount of impact you're making. So there's not, I think our average house for both of them was like 8 or 9. I can't remember
I
now.
think in the current year, I want to say it's 5 or 6.
Whatever.
I think it's 5 or 6, but it increases 10% in October and then 10% every year.
Right.
Well, the thing of it is, everybody wants to move here. You wanna move here, it's gonna cost you. I
Yeah.
mean, we've sat back on our heels way too long.
Right.
We have. We're in this situation.
And I'll-
And again, I want to end, or not end, but I would just want to say one more time, we have the funding, thanks to this team, to upgrade the existing plant and serve our community. We're only talking about serving people that don't live here right now, that want to live here, that want to come in the future. And we're simply saying to developers, we'll build it, but you have to take the risk. So we're not talking about our residents here. Yeah, right. Commissioner Farnsworth?
So it's 14,000 for a home. What about commercial property? How are they affected?
Mr. Mayor, your non-residential is tied to the meter size. So if it's
It's
based on
a-
how much water capacity they use, so if they use the 2-inch meter.
Wash and fold.
Applies accordingly.
ERU.
Yes.
One point, just for the commission's knowledge, is City Commission first adopted the development fees back in the early 2000s. Commission increased them once in 2007 and then once in 2022. Our impact fees have not been increased, not our impact fees, our development fees have not been increased annually to keep up with cost inflation, cost of goods.
Which is one of the reasons why we ran into trouble, because Tallahassee's saying development's not paying for itself. Or we are not keeping up with the cost. And so that's why you're asking us for $90 million, because you haven't been offsetting this cost to the developer. Jamie, I know it's coming. Jamie, go ahead, talk for a little bit.
I was just gonna say anecdotally, it's proposed that you're basically raising the wastewater one up $10,499 in 2024. To put that in perspective, when I drove off from Bay County in 2015, it was $10,000 there in 2015.
There it is.
What about Cottondale and Bonifay?
This covered Southport, which is smaller than Newberry, and all the unincorporated areas.
Okay, so we have a plan of attack.
Just
Come on
one
up,
quick
Ms. Tammy.
second. I just wanted to add one thing. You're absolutely spot on. We're going to do all of our due diligence. We're going to continue to push full throttle in the requests for the Springs grant. I think that that grant is critical to this project and project success. Your benefit of going AWT to the Santa Fe River and to the Springs is essential to the state. And so
We're regional.
absolutely. So we are going to be full throttle on that until we get an answer December to February.
Okay, so we have a timeline. We know, what is in front of us. We look forward to seeing what those options are. Dallas?
I just want to make sure, because I need to start drafting ordinances, that the commission is on board with the proposal, the step-in proposal that we proposed, and when we have our first budget hearing in less than 2 weeks, that is the ordinance that the commission wants us to bring forward, is to adopt these in development fees at the 50% step-in over the next 2 years.
I got 3 head nods, yes.
Impact fees go up how much?
Impact fees,
Impact fees go up 10% every
10%?
year that you've already adopted.
We already got that, and then this will just be what we see here.
Correct.
After the 2-year period, should that, should we start thinking about the routine adjustment?
it's 12.5% every 4 years.
State statute, my brain's not working. State statute doesn't allow you to increase impact fees except for every 4 years. So our plan is increase these year 1 and 2 because you have extraordinary circumstances, and then every 4 years subsequently increase them again. And that plan fully funds the treatment plan.
Commissioner Coleman?
What other cities close to us are doing this?
I mean, everyone.
I wanna know.
In terms of development
I don't
agreements,
wanna hear Cottondale either.
Alachua, city of Alachua, I
are you
heard.
talking about the development agreement part or the development fee part?
This is full approach,
Yeah,
Huh?
the full approach, right?
Yeah, the whole
yeah.
approach.
Just shifting the mentality to saying we're shifting the risk. Is it gonna be
You
Alachua
or-
and Newberry? Are we the only 2 cities in Alachua County that's changing our methodology?
No, not at all. So we are, the company I work for is national. We're seeing this across the nation. I work throughout the South region, mostly in Florida, and I have numerous clients going through the exact same process as you guys are. However, I will say that Newberry has done an exceptional job at keeping up with where you need to be on the rate side for your existing ratepayers, because we have communities that are at the same crossroads as you, but in addition to that, they're having to raise rates 60, 70, 80% just for wastewater, 50, 60% on the water side, just to get there, in addition to having to do these steps that you guys are. So it's not just you, to existing ratepayers. So,
They have
Correct.
fun election cycles.
yep, just Newberry's done a great job on that front, but it's not just you guys in this boat. It is across the state heavily right now with inflation. And a lot of communities where we used to be able to fund these types of projects, 100% grant or very close to it, are now having to get bridge financing because SRF is only able to give them a low interest loan up to a certain amount every year. And with inflation, it's so high above that, they can't put their projects on the street to bid without even doing bridge financing. So it's not just you guys, it's across the state, it's across the
Can you give us one other
nation.
city? That's
Right now,
besides
city of
Alachua?
Groveland.
Like around here, Groveland? Okay.
Yep, city of LaBelle.
Oh, in LaBelle?
Yep,
I mean, y'all's policy has always been the ratepayer pays for the operation and a little depreciation, and capital outlay is funded through development fees, those kinds of things. So, and I think it sounds like that has served us well as a policy. So
absolutely.
sometimes it hurts.
I'll add one thing to that. The city of Newberry is a little bit unique because your growth percentage is high for a community your size. The growth percentage, the rate that you're growing is exceptional.
We are victims.
I'm going to be claiming my my entitlement for being a victim. Yeah.
I think we should go with the application process, but they said.
I'm just
All right.
going to go buy a home. I'm just going to
Yeah.
move in.
Jamie, move us towards wrapping up here.
Just anecdotally for the commission's benefit, we had this discussion with Scott Walker from Folds and Walker and encouraged him that since Archer was getting in the wastewater business, and once they get wastewater in Archer, they will see development, that they incorporate this process for themselves. He seemed amenable to that. He even seemed amenable to taking it back to some of his other municipal clients for at least a discussion.
Okay, final thoughts, questions from the board?
Thank you.
Yeah. Dallas, you got everything you need in terms of a head nod?
Yes, sir, I just have one comment.
Okay, one more comment.
I just want to let the commission know that we received our population estimate for 2024, and we are at 9,096 residents.
We are right under Alachua. I said 9,000, 9,600.
9,096,
And
9,100.
you said we were the second fastest growing city. Did you find that stat somewhere? Because I said that a few years ago, and then I had a whole lot of requests for where I got that number from. Is that your guess?
I can send you the art, I can send the article. Well, then you have the article.
Did that article quote me? Good. Then send me that article. All right.
It's a circular.
Yeah.